The guards dragged Lord Dunlin through heavy wooden doors, both of which were worn and grey from age, adorned with the iron depictions of a stag, a relic of the castle's predecessor. Coarse rope dug into his wrists, binding them behind his back, slowly burning their way through tender flesh. When Queen Katherine sent him out to treat with the Noose and his ilk, Dunlin knew it would end this way. Men that wore the Noose's banner were known as cruel at their worst, and vexing at their best. Dunlin had found them at their worst. When they heard his tidings, they laughed, dragged him from his saddle, and beat him so harshly that he thought they would kill him. Dunlin's reception made him doubtful about his mission. The Noose was not a kind man. This was true, but Queen Katherine had need of him, and she had trusted Dunlin to handle the matter. They continued to drag him through the hall, a long, solemn thing, with light creeping through thin windows, only to be broken upon banners that hung from the balconies above. A brown noose upon a grey field was depicted upon them, the sigil of House Gallows. Above him, he heard the straining of ropes, and as he looked, he saw the castle's name sake in motion. Above him was the old remnants of a grand iron chandelier, 10 feet in diameter, well polished and maintained, though it was sorely lacking in candles. Instead, 5 corpses hung from ropes tied around its diameter, swinging from balcony to balcony with blue swollen faces. The Pendulum is what men called it, the Noose's favorite toy. 2 of the bodies had already begun to decay, their stench creeping into the hall. The others were so fresh that he could still hear the pleas for mercy on their tongues. Out of the 3 fresher examples, 2 of them were boys, probably no older than 12 winters. Thieves, most like. Dunlin thought to himself. Foolish boys. Any thief with a lick of sense knows not to steal within the Noose's borders. Anywhere else they might have lost a hand or finger, but not here. Here they swung, to never grow older. They must have been desperate. The pendulum never lost momentum, not when Lord Gallows hung the bodies of Lord Tallstag's wife and children from its rims, not when the rebel king pelted the castle's walls with siege weapons, and not when Dunlin passed under it. On and on it swung, like a chime in the wind, whose song was the straining of ropes. The guards finally threw him to his knees at the foot of a dais. Smooth stone steps climbed up to a chair so plain and bare you'd expect it to be found in a tavern. Lounging in it was the Lord of the Pendulum, Morban Gallows. The Noose was a large man, more wide than tall, and more muscle than fat. His skin was darker than most, akin to bronze, and with his bald head it shined just as bright. A short and ugly nose hung above a well-groomed black beard that worked to hide a square jaw. Deep within sunken sockets were hazel stones, cold and uncaring. He wore a leather surcoat that was ineffective in hiding his big burly arms, at the end of which were thick and calloused hands, rough from the burns of ropes. One would think that a man such as he would have a voice that boomed, demanding respect. But when he spoke, his voice was so deep and quiet that it bordered on silence, carrying the sandy accent of Sanjar. "Sir Dunlin, to what do I owe the pleasure of your company? Gracious of you to see me, my lord, though I do wish your guards treated me more kindly. And it is Lord Dunlin now. Queen Katherine has named me Warden of the Watchdogs, and has granted me the seat of the kennel." Dunlin kept his tone flat, best not to offend the man in his own home. "From knight to houndmaster?" Gallows allowed a small smile to crease his cheeks. "Truly a seat for a man of your ability. And Queen Katherine, is it? Forgive me, my lord, if I am mistaken, but last I remembered Faraglees has a king." "Had. The king is dead, my lord. Word was sent from the capital. I thought you would know. Would I? Gallows rubbed his chin. Indeed, there has been word from the capital, stating the death of the king. A heart attack late in the night, was it? How tragic. He snapped his fingers and a servant emerged from a side door in the hall, carrying a saucer of wine glasses in one hand and a carafe in another. Gallows took a glass and poured, creating a scarlet whirlpool. As he swirled his drink, Gallows looked back towards the wine glasses. Would you like something to quench your thirst, Lord Dunlin? A fine Cressvellon red, a gift from one of my daughter's suitors. You are most gracious, Lord Gallows, but I'm afraid I'll have to refuse. Dunlin bowed as well as he was able. While the wine might have made the pain more bearable, he wanted his mind at its sharpest when dealing with the Noose. The bronze man nodded. Tell me then, what is it that Lady Katherine wants with me? Doubtless she is the reason why you're here. Dunlin licked the blood from his lips. Queen Katherine and Her Majesty would ask that you help support her claim. Surely you are aware of the situation the kingdom has found itself in. Gallows laughed, a hollow sound devoid of any joy. Oh yes, I'm very much aware of how each of the great houses have crowned themselves king. He took another sip. Or queen in this case. As far as I'm aware, Lady Katherine and all the other would-be kings are traitors who have broken the laws of succession. It was my understanding that when the king leaves no legitimate heirs upon his death, the crown should pass to the queen and her family. Or am I wrong? I admit, your Western laws are strange to a foreigner such as I. Dunlin pressed his lips together, unable to meet the Noose's eyes as he answered. You have the right of it, my lord. Gallows took another sip of wine before leaning forward in his suggestion of a chair. So, what makes this Katherine Morester queen? Did our good king marry her in secret? Is she some long-lost daughter of his? Was she crowned by the other houses, perhaps? Again, Dunlin failed to meet his eyes. No, my lord. Defeat staining his answer. Gallows studied Dunlin before leaning back in his seat, his whisper of a voice turning into a hiss. Then tell me, Lord Dunlin, Lord of the Kennel and Warden of the Watchdogs, why I should bestir myself to help this woman who by all rights should be hanged as a traitor. In that moment, the hall grew silent, save for the straining of the pendulum as it swung back and forth. At this, Dunlin regained his courage, once again meeting Gallows's gaze. When the bastard lion rose up in rebellion, Anders Morester was the first to declare his support for King Wesley, along with yourself, my lord. He was a good man, with not only the strength to wield his power but the wisdom as well. His daughter, Queen Katherine, is much the same. You are well informed, my lord. Surely you've heard the stories. The young firebrand who would restore our kingdom to its former glory. Dunlin's voice began to swell with pride. He believed every word he said. Out of all the lords to crown themselves king, Katherine alone had what it took to be a queen. She understood that ruling was a duty, not a privilege. Lord Gallows had finished his wine, placing it on the servant's saucer, dismissing her with a wave of his hand, his eyes never leaving Dunlin's. Yes, Lord Dunlin, I remember Anders, and I do so fondly. He was the first among you to accept an outsider such as myself into this kingdom. A kind man, with a good heart. So why not help support his daughter's claim? Dunlin was cut off as Gallows raised his hand. That heart of his led him to his death. What was it that brought his end? Remind me, Lord Dunlin. Dunlin tensed, not liking the question. It was goblins, my lord. They ambushed him as he made his way to peace talks with several of the clan leaders. Gallows nodded. A tragic end, but one fitting for a man such as he. Gallows rose to his feet, the dais allowing him to loom over Dunlin. Dunlin lurched forward. "You would dare insult his name? The man you would call friend?" "Is the truth an insult now? Yes, I loved Anders like a brother, but I was not blind to the fool that he was. He trusted in the integrity of murderers and liars, and was surprised when he was met with such." Dunlin's blood began to boil. "And you think Queen Katherine is the same? Bound or not, my lord, I will suffer no insults to my queen's honor." "Do I think her a fool? No, quite the opposite, in fact. After all, she sent you to treat with me." Gallows snapped his fingers, and another servant emerged with ropes. Dunlin grew stiff. In the hands of Morban Gallows, ropes were just as deadly as a blade. "My lord, what do you mean by that?" His voice shaking more than he'd like. But just as the question left his lips, a figure entered the hall from the side door, following just after the servant. Plated sabatons echoed throughout the hall as the woman moved to join Gallows upon the dais. She was an armored shadow whose plate was tinted midnight, paired with an ebon cape with crimson borders that crept closely behind her. Embossed upon the breastplate was a dragon encircled around a sword, eating its own tail. Gold and crimson accents displayed elegant depictions of dragons and knights doing battle upon the borders of her pauldrons, much like a scene from a wordsmith's tale. And yet this still wasn't the most striking thing about her. Covering her face was an armet adorned with twin crimson dragon horns, climbing into the air in a spiral, mimicking the worms taking flight. Standing before him was Lysera Varncroft, the Dragon Knight, and the last Dragon Slayer. "Gallows, you bastard! You'd side yourself with this she-worm, with murderers and traitors!" The she-worm herself remained silent, as if her armor protected her from insults as well as blades. Gallows peered down at Dunlin as he stood atop the dais, playing no more the part of cordial lord, but that of a judge sentencing a prisoner. "Much like his daughter, you've learned little from Lord Anders's example." Dunlin spat on the ground, mockery accompanying his anger. "You're right. I trusted in the integrity of a despot. Can I really be surprised by his treachery?" Gallows laughed. Again that hollow sound floated through the hall. "Your words ring truer than you realize." Dunlin's split lips creased in a snarl, baring bloody teeth. "Speak plainly, blackguard." Gallows took the rope into his hands. "Why is it that you are here, my lord? To ask for my allegiance, obviously, but such a thing could be asked for by Raven. So why send you? The answer is simple." He looked at Dunlin, those hazel stones burning away Dunlin's resolve. "I can't ignore you. You, Lord Aemery Dunlin, Warden of the Watchdogs and Lord of the Kennel. You I must acknowledge." Confusion broke through Dunlin's rage. "Why?" Gallows wore his smile like a pig would a dress. "Because, Lord Dunlin, the kingdom is at war, and when at war, what is it that you do to your enemies?" As he spoke, his hands worked the rope into his banner's image. Guards began to spill in from the side door and from the hall, pulling Dunlin to his feet. It was said that the pendulum never lost momentum, but that was untrue. The only time it ever stopped was when it was adorned with a new ornament. Dunlin saw its shadow slowly cease to sway. "You God's damned coward!" The words left Dunlin's lips as a hiss, the guards lifting him to his feet. "You are her question, Lord Dunlin, a question she knows I have no choice but to answer. The queen, who you say to be the inheritor of her father's kindness, has sent you here to die." Gallows stepped down from the dais and wreathed the noose around Dunlin's neck. The guards grabbed the other end of the rope, throwing it over the pendulum's rim, a maneuver that was well practiced. Gallows looked Dunlin in the eye, and where there were once uncaring stones, were eyes brimming with anticipation. "You asked if I think your queen a fool, did you not? I don't. Unlike her father, she has the wisdom to rule. After all, she sent you to me, didn't she?" Dunlin was pulled from his feet, the rope around his neck cutting off any reply he wished to spit in the noose's face. He was pulled up foot by agonizing foot until his neck slammed into the pendulum's rim. As the guards climbed ladders to tie him in place, Dunlin used what motion he could muster to look to his left. There he saw the two boys. Would his face look like that, he wondered, blue and swollen and full of regret. They must have been desperate. It wasn't long before the pendulum continued its repetitive dance, this time with a new partner.